The date was October 18, 1943. The location was approximately 20 miles southeast of Cape Esperance in the Solomon Islands. Vice Admiral Taketo Karita's destroyer squadron had spotted something extraordinary. An abandoned American merchant vessel listing noticeably to one side, its engines dead, its crew long gone. The crew had evacuated hours before, leaving the Liberty ship drifting like a ghost. For a Japanese navy desperate to resupply its forces after losing 2 transport ships just the previous week, this discovery felt like salvation. A gift from the heavens themselves. Karita's boarding team descended into the forward cargo hold expecting to find military equipment. What they discovered instead left them breathless. 53 brand-new jeeps sat chained securely to the deck. The keys hung in every ignition. The fuel tanks were completely full. Beyond the vehicles, they found countless crates of rifles stacked meticulously, each one 8 feet high, each one labeled excess inventory. The word echoed through Karita's mind. Excess. His own garrison stationed on Kolombangara and other islands had only 140 serviceable rifles to arm 800 men. The Americans. They had excess? The concept seemed almost alien. Moving deeper through the ship, Karita and his officers discovered 4.8 million rounds of machine gun ammunition in medically sealed cans. There were refrigerated sections containing beef. 10,000 cans of peaches sat in neat rows. Another area held 15,000 bottles of Coca-Cola, not supplies for combat operations, but routine resupply items. And then there was the builder's plate, which told a story all its own. Construction time, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. His own destroyer, the Isukazi, had required 18 months to build. This American merchant vessel represented the 347th shipment sent to just a single island. The mathematics became impossible to ignore. The only rational conclusion was that Japan had somehow already lost a war it still believed it was fighting. When the Isukazi had come alongside the drifting hull that morning at 0630 hours, Karita had studied the vessel carefully through his binoculars. The ship appeared to displace 14,000 tons, perhaps more. American construction methods were evident everywhere. The welded hull plates instead of riveted seams, the assembly line aesthetic so foreign to the precision of Japanese shipyards. No flag flew from her, no smoke came from the stacks. The listing suggested flooding in a lower compartment, but nothing catastrophic had occurred. She had been abandoned, likely because of a false submarine alarm. American merchant crews had developed the unfortunate habit of evacuating their ships at the slightest sonar ping, leaving perfectly serviceable vessels to drift while crews waited in lifeboats for rescue that somehow always materialized. Karita lowered his binoculars and felt the cumulative weight of 31 years of naval service settle heavily across his chest. He had been there at Pearl Harbor when the bombs fell. He had watched the carriers Akagi and Kaga burn at Midway, their flight decks twisted like paper, understanding instinctively that Japan would need years to replace what had been lost in a single morning. He had fought at Santa Cruz and witnessed American ships absorb damage that would have sunk Japanese vessels, their damage control parties performing miracles that should have been impossible. Now, in October of 1943, he commanded a destroyer squadron tasked with supplying garrisons slowly starving on islands whose names most Japanese civilians could not pronounce. 2 transports had been lost last week, sunk by submarines operating south of Bougainville, taking with them ammunition, rice, and medical supplies his men could not afford to lose. And now, inexplicably, came this vessel. Providence, perhaps. Yet Karita had learned not to trust Providence in a war where radio intercepts mentioned American ship names he had never heard of. Dozens of carriers appearing as if conjured from thin air. Hundreds of destroyers materializing without explanation. He turned to his executive officer and issued instructions. Boarding party Commander Fujita, I want a complete damage assessment and a full cargo manifest within the hour. The officer saluted sharply and descended the ladder. Minutes later, a motor launch detached from Izukazi's side, carrying 24 men across the water toward the Liberty ship's dangling rope ladder. They scaled it quickly and disappeared into the superstructure. Karita watched them vanish into the ship, then retreated to his sea cabin to draft the preliminary report he would send to headquarters. One captured American merchant vessel, estimated displacement 14,000 tons, cargo unknown, salvage value unknown. He left that final line blank, choosing instead to wait for Fujita's assessment. 45 minutes passed as Karita drank tea that had gone cold and reviewed charts showing approaches to Bougainville. 380 nautical miles separated them from their destination. If they could secure a tow line, if the flooding could be contained, if American patrol planes failed to find them before darkness fell, too many conditions had to align perfectly, but the potential reward justified the considerable risk. A single ship this size could sustain his forward positions for weeks. The radio crackled with Fujita's voice, tight with something Karita couldn't quite identify. "Admiral, you need to see this." "I cannot," Karita replied. "The manifest does not contain—" A pause accompanied static. "Then please come aboard, sir." Karita found Commander Fujita standing in the forward cargo hold, surrounded by the boarding party, everyone silent, everyone staring. The smell arrived first: new rubber, fresh paint, the sharp tang of Cosmoline preservation grease. Then his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the open hatch, and the shapes resolved themselves into focus. Jeeps, row upon row of them, Willis quarter-ton trucks painted olive drab, still wearing the factory protective coating. Karita began counting. 10, 20, 30. He stopped at 53, though more ranks extended into shadows beyond the hold's lighting. Each vehicle was chained properly to the deck. Each had full fuel cans strapped to its rear. Each had keys hanging from the ignition. 53 vehicles, Fujita said quietly, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone overwhelmed by shock. Just in the forward hold, Karita thought. He moved past the jeeps to the starboard bulkhead, where wooden crates reached 8 feet high and extended 30 feet deep. The stenciling on the nearest crate read, "Rifle US Cal 30 M1903A3 Springfield, quantity 50 units. The manufacturing date was stamped below, September 1943, just 60 days prior. He walked the length of the stack, examining crate after crate. Rifles, bayonets, cleaning kits, ammunition boxes labeled Cal 30-06 Ball M2. 1,000 rounds. The numbers accumulated in his mind. 50 rifles per crate, 20 crates visible in a single stack alone. Thousands of rifles occupying just one hold of one ship. "How many rifles does your garrison on Kolombangara possess?" Karita asked. Fujita's response came automatically. The numbers burned into memory through months of supply requisitions and rationing calculations. 140 serviceable rifles for 800 men, sir. And here, Karita gestured at the surrounding crates. Fujita paused, recalculating. At least 3,000 rifles in this hold alone. Perhaps more. The phrase stamped on several crates caught Karita's eye, excess inventory. He stared at those two words. Excess. His men fought with bolt-action rifles manufactured in 1938, each one tracked meticulously, each loss requiring written justification to Tokyo. These Americans possessed excess rifles. Rifles manufactured 60 days ago and now being shipped across 9,000 miles of ocean to islands captured merely 6 months earlier. "There are 5 more holds," Fujita said. "I sent teams to inventory the others." He handed Karita a clipboard containing the preliminary reports, listing what the teams considered most critical. Karita read through the pages. 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns, 12 complete systems with 60,000 rounds of ammunition. 50 caliber machine guns, 48 units. Ammunition for them, 4.8 million rounds housed in medically sealed cans. The number seemed impossible. He read it again. 4.8 million rounds. His entire destroyer squadron carried perhaps 200,000 rounds of machine gun ammunition across all vessels combined. 75mm artillery shells, 15,000 rounds. Hand grenades, 48,000. Bazookas, weapons Karita knew only from intelligence briefings, 240 units with 2,400 rockets. "This is accurate?" Karita asked. "Conservative, if anything, sir," Fujita replied. "My men stopped counting when the numbers became meaningless. We found a refrigerated compartment containing medical supplies. Plasma, 2,000 units of plasma, Admiral. I have 40 morphine doses for 330 men aboard Isukazi. Karita descended deeper into the ship with Fujita following. They passed through English-marked hatches and descended ladders, still smelling of fresh paint, into a hold that hummed with electric refrigeration. Temperature dropped sharply. Inside, neatly racked and labeled, were medical supplies that could have equipped a major hospital. Plasma bottles, morphine sealed in boxes of 1,000. Sulfur drugs, surgical kits, sterilized and disposable, complete down to sutures and scalpels. 10,000 morphine doses, more than his entire squadron had seen in a year of combat. Yet it was the next hold that shattered something fundamental in Karita's understanding of the war itself. The provision stores, refrigerated beef hanging from hooks, 40,000 pounds, canned peaches, 10,000 cans, real coffee, 5,000 pounds, not the chicory substitute issued to Japanese troops. Chocolate bars, 75,000, each 5 ounces wrapped in waxed paper. Cigarettes, 200,000, brands he recognized from captured supplies. Pall Mall, Lucky Strike, and then, impossibly, 15,000 bottles of Coca-Cola, soda for soldiers, not medicine, not ammunition. Luxury, for soldiers who already had more food than they could consume. Karita stood in the cold hold and performed the mathematics. His garrison on Bougainville, 8,000 men, subsisted on rice and whatever could be foraged from jungle. Fish when available, tree bark when fish could not be caught. 2 weeks prior, a supply runner had brought word that men were dying not from American bullets, but from beriberi and malnutrition. And here, on a single American supply ship, sat 15,000 bottles of carbonated sugar water. Not medicine, not ammunition, luxury, for soldiers already gorged with provisions. A manifest hung on a clipboard near the provision hold entrance. His English proved adequate for technical documents. He read the header. SS Robert Peary. Voyage 17. Destination, Guadalcanal. Shipment number 347. Classification, routine resupply. Routine resupply, shipment 347 to one island. An island the Americans had captured 10 months prior. 347 times 14,000 tons. He pulled out his pocket notebook and calculated anyway. 4.86 million tons of supplies to Guadalcanal alone. Japan's entire remaining merchant fleet capacity was 6 million tons and shrinking weekly as submarines hunted tankers returning from the Dutch East Indies. Karita looked at Fujita, who stared at a crate of chocolate bars as if it might strike him down. "How long to transfer what we can carry?" Karita asked. 2 days, sir. Perhaps 3, Fujita said. The volume. He gestured helplessly at the surrounding cargo. We could take perhaps 2% of what is here. The rest? Burns, Karita finished. We cannot tow it. We cannot defend it. We scuttle the ship at nightfall. He paused. But first, I want complete documentation. Photographs, serial numbers. I want Tokyo to see exactly what we found. Admiral, Fujita's voice was quiet and strained. If this is routine resupply, if they are sending this much to every island, how many ships like this do they have? Karita did not answer because he had already calculated the number, and the answer was worse than any tactical defeat at Midway or Santa Cruz. The answer lay in the builder's plate he had found in the engine room, stamped with construction data that made no sense until suddenly it made perfect and terrible sense. Construction time, 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. His destroyer had taken 18 months to build. While his crew labored to transfer what little they could salvage, Karita made his way aft through the Liberty ship's interior passages, tracing the mechanical systems that gave the vessel life. The engineering space gleamed with fresh paint and the sharp smell of new machinery. His engineering officer, a lieutenant who had graduated at the top of his Naval Academy class, accompanied him, clipboard in hand, recording observations with methodical precision. The main engine featured a triple expansion steam reciprocating design, nothing sophisticated, almost primitive by modern standards. Yet it was the construction method that arrested Karita's attention. Every major component, the engine block, reduction gears, propeller shaft bearings, was standardized, identical, interchangeable. The lieutenant pointed out serial numbers stamped into the castings. These match across multiple systems, Admiral. The pumps, the windlass, even the steering gear, they're using identical parts throughout. Karita ran his hand along a welded hull seam, no rivets anywhere, only welding throughout, which Japanese doctrine still considered inferior for warship construction. Yet this ship had crossed 9,000 miles, survived typhoon season, and delivered its cargo intact. The welds had held. More than held. They had been faster to install, required less skilled labor, and eliminated the thousands of rivet holes that created structural weak points. Near the bulkhead entrance, someone had posted a production schematic. Karita studied it, with his lieutenant translating technical English terms. The ship was constructed in sections. Prefabricated modules built in different shipyard areas, then assembled like children's building blocks. Bow section, stern section, midships modules. Engine room dropped in as a complete unit. Superstructure lifted by crane onto a prepared foundation. Assembly line methodology, the same process Henry Ford used to build automobiles, now applied to ocean-going vessels weighing 14,000 tons. The builder's plate hung mounted prominently in the engine control room, brass polished to bright finish. Kaiser Shipyards, Richmond, California. Keel laid September 27, 1943. Launched October 3, 1943. Delivered October 8, 1943. Below that, in smaller letters, build time 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes. Karita made his lieutenant repeat the translation twice. 4 days. Less than a week from keel laying to launch. His destroyer Isokaze had required 18 months from keel to commissioning. The heavy cruiser Tone, which he had served aboard early in the war, had consumed 3 years. Even emergency construction programs implemented after Midway had managed reducing destroyer construction only to 14 months. "This is not possible," the lieutenant said flatly. "No shipyard can work this fast. The hull plating alone requires weeks of fitting and welding. Engine installation is assembled elsewhere and dropped into the hull," Karita interrupted. He tapped the schematic. "They are not building ships the way we build ships. They have reconceived the entire process." He did calculations in his notebook. "How many Liberty ships have we encountered in the past 6 months?" The lieutenant consulted his records. Intelligence estimates approximately 200 confirmed sightings across the Pacific Theater, though many sightings may represent duplicate observations of the same vessels. "Assume 100 unique ships," Karita said. "Built at this rate, 4 to 5 days per ship." He wrote the numbers. That suggests production capacity of approximately 70 ships per year from a single yard. If multiple shipyards were operating, if this represented an entire industrial system rather than individual craftsmanship, he found his answer in the crew quarters of all places. A notice appeared on the bulletin board outside the crew's dining quarters. Dated September 1943, it carried the official seal of Kaiser Shipyards. The headline blazed across the top. "Richmond Yard No. 2 breaks record. Hull 440, launched in 4 days, 15 hours." Beneath that announcement ran a production chart displaying monthly output figures from 4 separate Kaiser facilities spread across the country. Yard 1 delivered 18 ships per month. Yard 2 pushed out 21 ships per month. Yard 3 managed 16 ships monthly. Yard 4 produced 19 ships each month. The newsletter also listed competitors: Bethlehem Steel, Delta Shipbuilding, Todd Batheron. Karita sat down hard on one of the crew bunks, the weight of what he was reading pressing down on him. The numbers told a story that couldn't be ignored or reinterpreted. If America was building roughly 50 Liberty ships every month, and that was actually a conservative figure based on what the newsletter showed, they were producing 700,000 tons of replacement shipping capacity monthly. Japan's remaining merchant fleet, after 20 months of submarine warfare, had eaten away at it, totaled approximately 4 million tons. The mathematics was devastating. The Americans were reconstructing Japan's entire remaining shipping capacity every 6 months, working from production programs that had only started less than 2 years prior. He walked toward the crew's mess, drawn by something that had caught his eye earlier. There on the wall hung a menu board, dated for the week of September 27th through October 3rd. Not emergency rations. A real menu with actual choices. Monday offered roast beef or baked chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread with butter, coffee, and dessert. Either apple pie or vanilla ice cream. Tuesday featured homemade meatloaf, scalloped potatoes, carrots, rolls with butter, coffee, and a choice of chocolate cake or rice pudding. This pattern repeated through the week. Every single day brought 2 protein selections, multiple side dishes, fresh bread, butter, coffee, and dessert options. This aboard a cargo ship. These were not survival rations doled out sparingly. This was restaurant-quality service. His own sailors received 800 grams of rice daily when supply ships managed to get through, sometimes far less. They supplemented what they could with fishing or scrounging whatever nature offered. Meat appeared only when they were actually in port. Fresh vegetables were impossible to come by. The contrast was utterly obscene. Inside the captain's quarters, Karita discovered the ship's log and a few personal items left behind during the frantic evacuation. A small pocket Bible rested on the shelf. Reading glasses lay nearby. A harmonica sat in a corner. And tucked into the front cover of the log was a photograph. It showed a ship launching ceremony at the Richmond shipyards. The frame filled with thousands of workers. Karita counted at least 3,000 visible, possibly as many as 5,000. In the foreground sat a Liberty ship on the ways, its hull decorated with bunting. A brass band occupied a platform near the bow. But it was what lay beyond that grabbed Karita's attention. 3 additional Liberty ship hulls were under construction simultaneously, their skeletal steel frames rising from the slipways like towering forests of metal. Workers swarmed across each structure, thousands of them. Many wore coveralls and welding masks. Women worked alongside men at every station, operating cranes, reading blueprints. The photograph captured them at every level of the construction process, integrated into the workforce as though this were completely ordinary. In one corner, penciled directly onto the white border of the photograph, someone had scrawled a note. Mum, I'm the one next to Crane Nor 7. Job pays $1.80 overtime after 40 hours. Love, Jenny. Karita stared at those words. $1.80 per hour. He converted it mentally to Japanese currency. At current exchange rates, that worked out to roughly 1,800 per hour. A Japanese factory worker earned approximately 40 yen for an entire month of labor. 30 full days of work. This American woman, building warships, earned more in 3 hours than a Japanese worker made in a month. And she was doing overtime by choice. Voluntarily working extra hours to produce additional ships in exchange for extra money. He set the photograph down and made his way back to the main deck where his crew transferred crates of ammunition across to Izakazi's hold. The sun descended toward the horizon. In 3 hours, they would scuttle this vessel to prevent the Americans from recapturing it. They would manage to take perhaps 2% of its cargo, 150,000 rounds of ammunition from the 4.8 million stored aboard, 180 morphine doses from 10,000 in the medical stores, 1,800 pounds of food from 700,000 tons. His executive officer approached with the transfer status report. Sir, we've reached our limit. Any additional weight will compromise Izakazi's trim and stability. Understood. Prepare the scuttle charges, thermite in the engine spaces and forward holds. I want nothing left that could be salvaged. The officer hesitated before speaking. Admiral, the men are questioning this. If this ship represents routine resupply, if the Americans have hundreds of vessels like this, then we're fighting an opponent whose industrial capacity we fundamentally miscalculated. Yes, that is precisely what it means. He looked down at the photograph still in his hand, studying the woman next to Crane 7, earning what amounted to 18 times a Japanese worker's monthly wage per hour. Assemble the officers. I want a conference on Izakazi's bridge at 2100 hours. Before we sink this ship, they need to understand what we've found. At 2100 hours, Karita's officers assembled on Izakazi's bridge. 11 men filled the navigation space, destroyer captains, squadron staff, senior department heads, bathed in the red glow of night vision lamps that cast everything in shades of blood. Through the forward windows, the Liberty ship's silhouette rose against the stars, listing progressively lower as water continued seeping into the compartments below. In 2 hours, the thermite charges would reduce the engineering spaces to molten slag, and the vessel would join the dozens of other wrecks scattered across the Solomon Sea floor. But first, Karita needed these officers to comprehend what they were destroying and what that destruction truly meant. He spread his notebook across the chart table, pages filled with calculations and production figures, comparative analyses painstakingly compiled over 12 hours of meticulous documentation. The officers crowded closer, their faces remained expressionless, trained discipline in the Japanese naval tradition. But Karita read the tension written in their shoulders, the way Lieutenant Morinaga, his operations officer, gripped the table edge until his knuckles turned white. "Listen carefully," Karita began, his voice carrying the flat, measured precision of a man reporting experimental data rather than strategic catastrophe. "I will present only facts. You will draw your own conclusions." He flipped to the first page. Steel production, calendar year 1943. United States, 81 million tons per year. Empire of Japan, 7.8 million tons per year. He let that ratio settle, 10-1. No one spoke. Karita continued. Aircraft production for the same period. United States, 85,433 aircraft. Empire of Japan, 16,693 aircraft. That represents a ratio of 5-1. He turned the page. Petroleum access, United States domestic production plus imports, 200 million barrels per year. Empire of Japan, including Dutch East Indies, production 28 million barrels per year, declining monthly as tankers sink faster than we can replace them. The ratio there stands at 7-1. Commander Fujita cleared his throat. "Admiral, these figures align with what fleet intelligence has reported for months." The problem isn't the data itself. The actual problem, Lieutenant Morinaga interrupted quietly, is that acknowledging these ratios requires acknowledging our strategic position is mathematically untenable. He was a thin man, 41 years old, who had taught naval history at the academy before the war. His specialty was logistics and industrial capacity in modern warfare. "I wrote my dissertation on material factors during the Russo-Japanese conflict. Japan prevailed despite Russia's industrial advantage because we maintained shorter supply lines and superior tactical execution. But that ratio was perhaps 2-1, not 10-1. Karita nodded. "Exactly. Which brings us to this captured vessel." He withdrew the photograph from the Kaiser shipyard's launching ceremony and passed it around the group. "Note the background. 4 hulls under construction simultaneously. Now observe the workforce. We estimate approximately 5,000 workers visible in this single photograph alone. Many are women, a labor pool Japan has never mobilized for heavy industrial production." The photograph made its way around the circle. Captain Nakamura, commanding the destroyer Yukikaze, studied it the longest. "Sir, if I may observe, the woman's notation about $1.80 per hour. That exceeds our factory workers' monthly wages by a substantial margin." "By a factor of 4, Karita confirmed. She also mentions overtime, voluntary additional production beyond standard work hours. This indicates an economic system where industrial workers receive monetary incentives to maximize output. Japanese doctrine has always assumed American workers were being coerced or propagandized into wartime production. Yet this photograph suggests instead they are being paid generously, to work extended shifts." He retrieved the photograph and replaced it with documentation from the ship's builder's plate. Construction time: 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes from keel laying to launch. My staff initially suspected this was a typographical error. It is not. The vessel's design enables prefabricated section assembly using welding and standardized components. This reduces construction time by a factor of approximately 100 compared to traditional shipbuilding methods. Renaga began working calculations on a separate notepad. If one shipyard can produce a Liberty ship every 5 days, that represents 73 ships annually from a single facility. The newsletter mentioned 4 Kaiser yards alone. That alone means nearly 300 ships per year from one company. And Kaiser is not the only contractor, Karita added. The newsletter referenced competitors: Bethlehem Steel, Delta Shipbuilding, Todd Bathyron. If we work with conservative estimates, assume 20 total shipyards producing at half the rate documented here, we calculate American Liberty ship production at approximately 3,000 vessels annually. Silence stretched across the bridge. Finally, Captain Nakamura spoke. Admiral, those numbers cannot be correct. 3,000 cargo ships per year would represent— He couldn't finish the calculation or couldn't bring himself to. 42 million tons of new cargo capacity annually, Morinaga completed quietly. That is 14 times Japan's total remaining merchant fleet. He looked up from his calculations. 14 times, and that figure addresses only their merchant construction. It excludes warship production, carriers, destroyers, cruisers, submarines. Karita flipped to another page. Ship production through September 1943. United States Navy. 8 fleet carriers commissioned since Pearl Harbor. 15 escort carriers. 47 destroyers. 23 submarines. Comparative Japanese production for the same period: 2 fleet carriers, 0 escort carriers, 9 destroyers, 26 submarines. He closed the notebook. We sink their ships, our submarines achieve kills, our pilots score victories, but they replace losses faster than we can inflict damage. The inverse is not true for us. Fighting spirit, Captain Nakamura said suddenly, speaking as if reciting a lesson from the academy. Superior morale and tactical excellence can overcome material disadvantage. This is established doctrine. At Tsushima, we defeated a Russian fleet despite their— At Tsushima, Morinaga interrupted, his voice sharper than protocol normally permitted when addressing a senior officer. The Russian Baltic fleet had sailed 18,000 miles and arrived exhausted, poorly coordinated, demoralized. We fought that battle in our home waters with fresh crews and interior supply lines. The material ratio was perhaps 2 to 1. And even then, Admiral Togo planned with extraordinary precision, counted every shell, and accepted battle only when tactical geometry favored us absolutely. He gestured at Karita's notebook. These numbers represent ratios of 10 to 1, 13 to 1 in merchant shipping. At what mathematical point does fighting spirit become meaningless against pure numerical certainty? The question hung suspended in that blood-red lighting. Outside, thermite charges were being positioned aboard the Liberty ship. Karita could see the working party crossing the deck with shielded lanterns, preparing to destroy what they couldn't carry. 150,000 rounds of ammunition saved, 4.8 million rounds about to incinerate. The mathematics of utter futility. I will ask you something, Karita said quietly. This is not rhetorical. I genuinely seek your analysis. He looked at each officer individually. This vessel represents shipment number 347 to Guadalcanal, an island captured by the Americans 10 months ago. If each shipment approximates 14,000 tons, that means 4.86 million tons of supplies delivered to a single island base. Japan's entire merchant fleet, spread across the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and home waters, totals 6 million tons of capacity. That number declines every week. He paused, letting them absorb the implications. Given these figures, given what we know about production ratios and replacement rates, is there any tactical scenario under which Japan achieves a negotiated settlement to this war? No one answered at first. Then Morinaga spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Admiral, you're asking whether we can win a war we have already lost. I am asking, Karita corrected, whether continuing to fight under current doctrine serves the Emperor's interests or whether it serves only the institutional pride of officers who cannot admit they miscalculated. He met their eyes directly. I fought at Pearl Harbor. I saw our tactical success, but strategy is not tactics multiplied. Strategy is logistics multiplied by time. The abacus says we are spending lives purchasing time for negotiations that become less favorable with every Liberty ship that launches. The Liberty ship's whistle, left operational by the boarding party, suddenly blew 3 short blasts into the night. The scuttling signal. Thermite charges ready, officers evacuate. Through the bridge windows, Karita watched his men descend the rope ladders into the waiting motor launches. In 15 minutes, the charges would ignite. In 30, the ship would slip beneath the surface. Tomorrow, the Americans would note its loss in a ledger and authorize construction of a replacement that would launch in 4 days. Document your observations as you see fit, Karita told his officers. As for what you witnessed, what you concluded, I will submit my own assessment to Admiral Suemu Toyota at Combined Fleet. Whether it reaches him, whether it changes anything. He shrugged. That remains beyond our control, but the numbers will be documented. When this war ends, however it ends, historians will have access to facts. They will see we knew. They will see what was chosen, despite knowing. The first thermite charge ignited in a brilliant white-hot flare that lit the entire Liberty ship's hull plate. Another followed, then 6 more charges detonated simultaneously, turning the engineering spaces into blast furnaces reaching 3,000 degrees. The mathematics of steel met the mathematics of thermite, both equally implacable, both equally indifferent to courage, honor, or the will to fight. The Liberty ship burned through the night and slipped beneath the waves at 04:30 hours, taking with it 700,000 pounds of food, 10,000 morphine doses, and sufficient ammunition to sustain a division for 3 months. Karita watched the stern rise vertically in the pre-dawn darkness before the entire hull vanished in a surge of steam and churning water. His squadron had expended 800 gallons of irreplaceable fuel oil, fuel from tankers that wouldn't be coming, to retrieve supplies representing 0.001% of one American ship's cargo. The mathematics of the operation were worse than neutral. They were deeply, profoundly negative. He drafted his report to Admiral Suemu Toyota at Combined Fleet Headquarters in Tokyo over the following 6 days, as Isokaze made its way back to Rabaul. The document underwent 11 revisions. Each version presented the identical data: the cargo manifest, the builder's plate specifications, the production ratios, the photographic evidence. But Karita wrestled with tone, too direct, and the report would be dismissed as defeatist propaganda, possibly resulting in a court-martial for spreading anti-war sentiment. Too circumspect, and the message would drown in bureaucratic language that allowed comfortable staff officers to ignore uncomfortable truths. The final version ran 23 pages single-spaced, with 16 pages of supporting documentation and photographs. He marked it secret per protocol and filed it through proper channels on October 26, 1943. Dispatch confirmation showed it reached Tokyo on October 29th. He received no acknowledgement, no questions seeking clarification, no orders requesting additional details. The report disappeared into the Combined Fleet's filing system as though it had never existed. But Karita knew he was not alone in what he had seen. Evidence accumulated from multiple sources throughout late 1943, all pointing toward the same inescapable conclusion. Admiral Rizzo Tanaka commanded destroyer squadrons across the northern Solomon Islands, and he began filing intelligence reports that painted a stark picture. The documents detailed captured American field rations, C rations, and K rations packed with calories, 4 times what Japanese soldiers received. And they required no cooking at all. Cigarettes came included, so did toilet paper as standard issue. When Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's staff examined captured American Marines from Cape Gloucester, they found something even more striking. Each man carried more personal ammunition than an entire Japanese infantry platoon could muster. 830 rounds for his M1 rifle, plus hand grenades, plus ammunition for his sidearm. The disparity was staggering. Come November, Karita attended a squadron commanders' conference at Rabaul alongside 18 other officers representing what remained of the Combined Fleet surface units scattered across the South Pacific. 19 men total, commanding the last fighting ships Japan had left in these waters. The official agenda focused on tactics for the coming battles around Bougainville and Guadalcanal, on optimizing torpedo attack angles, on perfecting night combat procedures. But underneath the formal presentations, a question kept surfacing that nobody quite dared to ask directly. Commander Nakamura of Yukikasi finally approached it during a break between sessions, speaking almost casually. The Americans, he said, have commissioned 47 destroyers since Pearl Harbor. We have commissioned 9 in the same period. Another officer lit a cigarette, a captured American Lucky Strike, and exhaled slowly. But our doctrine assumes qualitative superiority compensates for quantitative disadvantage, he said. Superior night optics, better torpedoes, more aggressive commanders. And if, Morinaga asked quietly, the quantitative disadvantage exceeds the threshold where qualitative advantages matter at all. He stood at the window overlooking Simpson Harbor, watching a tanker offload fuel brought from the Dutch East Indies. The tanker had arrived 3 days late, forced to detour around suspected submarine contacts. Every gallon it carried had to be stretched across an entire fleet that burned fuel faster than tankers could deliver it. The Lanchester equation, Morinaga continued, suggests that in combat between equally trained forces, victory flows to the side with numerical superiority. And the advantage increases as the square of the ratio. If they have 5 times our numbers, their effective combat power is 25 times ours. Then we seek decisive engagement on favorable terms, Nakamura countered. We choose the time and place. We force them to fight where our advantages maximize and theirs minimize. That was Midway, Karita said quietly. Everyone fell silent. Midway remained the wound that refused to close. The battle where Japanese doctrine had proven correct in every detail except the final outcome. Superior training, better aircraft. The element of surprise. And then 3 American dive bombers had found the carriers with their decks loaded with planes. 4 carriers had died in 5 minutes, and the mathematics of carrier aviation had shifted permanently in Japan's disfavor. Morinaga turned from the window. May I speak a historical parallel, without it being construed as defeatist? He waited for Karita's nod. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, 1896, he began. The Sultan of Zanzibar refused a British ultimatum. The British responded with naval bombardment. The war lasted 38 minutes from first shot to surrender, the world's shortest war. Why so short? Because one side had the Royal Navy and the other had wooden dhows. The tactical disparity was so overwhelming that fighting spirit became irrelevant. The Sultan's men were brave. They were willing to die. But courage cannot deflect 12-inch shells. Who are you suggesting we are, Zanzibar? Captain Watanabe said flatly. He commanded the destroyer Shiranui, which had fought at Pearl Harbor and every major engagement since. You are suggesting that American industrial capacity has created a disparity comparable to the Royal Navy versus wooden boats. I am suggesting we should examine whether our strategic assumptions remain valid given observable evidence, Morinaga replied carefully. Japanese pre-war planning assumed a 6-month offensive phase securing resource zones, followed by a defensive phase where American offensives would exhaust themselves against prepared positions, leading to a negotiated settlement favorable to Japan. The assumption depended on American industrial capacity being insufficient to sustain prolonged defensive operations in the Pacific, while simultaneously fighting Germany in Europe. Karita pulled out a photograph from the Liberty ship, the woman next to Crane 7, earning $1.80 per hour, working overtime voluntarily. He placed it on the conference table. That assumption was incorrect, he said. They are sustaining operations on both fronts. Their production is accelerating, not diminishing, and they are paying their workers premium wages to work extra shifts. This is not a nation straining under wartime shortages. This is a nation whose economy has been stimulated by war production. The officers studied the photograph in silence. Finally, Captain Watanabe spoke. What are you proposing, Admiral, that we surrender? That we dishonor 30 years of service by recommending capitulation? I am proposing nothing, Karita said. I am stating observations. Whether those observations inform command decisions is not my authority to determine. He gathered the photograph and his notes. But I will say this. There are 3 paths visible from our current position. Path 1, fight to the last man, inflict maximum casualties, die with honor intact. This is becoming official doctrine. Path 2, achieve one more decisive naval victory, another Tsushima, then negotiate from strength. Seek terms that preserve something of what we sought to protect. Path 3. Recognize the war is unwinnable, minimize Japanese casualties, accept surrender with conditions that spare the home islands from invasion. The Imperial Army will never accept Path 3, Nakamura said. The Navy cannot advocate it without being purged by the military police. Path 2 requires a decisive victory we have not achieved in 18 months of trying, Morinaga added. Which leaves Path 1. Which leaves Path 1, Karita agreed. Mathematical certainty leading to maximum casualties, not because it serves the emperor, not because it serves Japan, but because institutional pride and honor culture have made it impossible to acknowledge error without destroying the institution that made the error. Morinaga returned to his seat and opened his notebook. I have been documenting communications from forward units, he said. Medical reports, supply requisitions, casualty figures. The truth is already visible for anyone willing to look. Garrisons on bypassed islands starving to death. Hospital ships sunk because we lack air cover to protect them. Ammunition rationed to 10 rounds per rifle because supply convoys cannot get through. The Americans are not defeating us tactically. They are bypassing our strong points and letting logistics kill us while they build airfields on islands we cannot reach. Then what do? Watanabe asked. We are squadron commanders. We follow orders. We fight where we are told to fight. We document, Karita said. We file reports. We create a record so that when this ends, however it ends, historians will see that some officers knew the truth was available, that the catastrophe was chosen, not stumbled into blindly. He stood. And we preserve our crews when possible. We do not waste lives on symbolic gestures when tactical withdrawal serves the larger strategic picture. We fight when fighting serves a purpose beyond demonstrating fighting spirit. The conference resumed its official agenda, but the unspoken question lingered in the air. How do you fight a war you know you have already lost? How do you send men to die for objectives that mathematics has already rendered meaningless? How do you maintain morale and discipline when the truth, the statistical, provable truth, contradicts everything your institution has built itself upon? Karita had no answers, only the photograph of a woman next to Crane 7 and the memory of 15,000 bottles of Coca-Cola burning in a ship that would be replaced in 4 days. Through November and December of 1943, Karita received no acknowledgement of his report. No questions, no reprimands. Combined Fleet Headquarters issued operational orders, patrol sectors, convoy escort assignments, instructions for the defense of Rabaul, but never referenced the Liberty ship capture or the production data he had submitted. The bureaucratic machinery processed his report the way it processed all uncomfortable truths by filing it away where it could be forgotten without being officially denied. But the evidence continued accumulating. In December, a reconnaissance flight photographed Santo Harbor and counted 63 cargo ships anchored in formation so dense they resembled a floating city. Intelligence analysts identified 41 as Liberty ships based on their distinctive profiles. 41 ships in one harbor. Each carried 14,000 tons of cargo. 574,000 tons of supplies within a single anchorage. Intelligence estimated total American supply stocks in the South Pacific at over 2 million tons by year's end. More tonnage than Japan's entire annual merchant construction program. January 1944 brought reports from the Marshall Islands that American logistics had achieved the impossible. Floating supply depots, mobile repair ships that could dry dock destroyers at sea, fleet oilers conducting underway refueling that let American carrier task forces operate continuously for months without returning to base. Japanese carriers needed to return to port every 3 weeks for fuel, provisions, and rest. American carriers simply refueled at sea from tankers that themselves refueled from other tankers in an infinite logistics chain stretching back to California. Refineries pumping 200 million barrels annually. Karita filed supplementary reports documenting each new discovery. Each report vanished into the same bureaucratic void. By February, he stopped expecting responses. The institution had made its choice not through explicit decision, but through deliberate inaction. Acknowledging the production disparity would require acknowledging the strategic implications. Acknowledging the strategic implications would require altering doctrine. Altering doctrine would require admitting the war's architects had miscalculated, and that admission would destroy the institution's credibility at precisely the moment when maintaining morale required projecting absolute confidence. So the institution chose blindness, not ignorance. The data existed, circulated, was read and understood by staff officers who filed it away, marked secret. Willful blindness. The kind of institutional self-deception that had allowed Finance Minister Korekiyo Takahashi to be assassinated in 1936 for warning that war with America would be economic suicide. His economic models had been correct, his mathematics had been sound, but he had been killed anyway because some truths threatened the social order more than foreign armies ever could. March brought Karita to Palau for another squadron commanders' conference. 27 officers this time, representing the remnants of the combined fleet surface units. The topic was defense preparations for the expected American offensive into the Marianas. Intelligence predicted the attack would come in May or June, targeting Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Losing the Marianas would put American B-29 bombers in range of Tokyo. The battle would be decisive, total commitment required. Admiral Gisaburo Ozawa, commanding the mobile fleet, briefed the operational plan. 9 carriers total, with 400 aircraft, would engage American carriers in Philippine waters. Superior Japanese pilot training and land-based air support from Mariana airfields would compensate for American numerical advantages. One decisive battle, properly executed, would blunt the American offensive and create conditions for negotiated settlement. Karita listened and calculated the odds. Over 100 Japanese aircraft versus American carrier groups that intelligence estimated at over 900 aircraft, supported by escort carriers, land-based bombers, and submarine reconnaissance. The Japanese plan assumed their aircraft would achieve 3-to-1 kill ratios based on superior training. But American pilot quality had improved dramatically since 1942, while Japanese veteran pilots, irreplaceable veterans, died in battles over Rabaul, Truk, and the Solomons faster than training programs could produce replacements. During the break, Morinaga approached with intelligence summaries he had compiled from multiple sources. American carrier production through March 1944, he said quietly, showing Karita the documents. 8 fleet carriers operational since Pearl Harbor. 27 escort carriers. Intelligence now estimates they have 9 more fleet carriers under construction, expected commissioning by year's end, plus another 40 escort carriers in various stages of completion. How are they crewing them? Karita asked. Trained carrier pilots require years of development, even with their training capacity. They changed the training pipeline, Morinaga interrupted. Intelligence captured documents from a downed American pilot showing they reduced carrier qualification from 3 years to 18 months. Not by lowering standards, but by systematizing instruction, standardized curricula, specialized training aircraft, dedicated instructor cadres. They are treating pilot production like manufacturing. Input students, output qualified aviators. Optimize the process. Karita thought of the Liberty ship's construction time. 4 days from keel to launch because they had reconceived shipbuilding as assembly rather than craftsmanship. Now they were doing the same with pilots, with everything. The American way of war was not about individual excellence, it was about systematic mass production of competence, supported by overwhelming material advantage. The Philippine sea battle will fail, Karita said flatly. Not because our pilots lack courage, not because our doctrine is flawed, but because we cannot replace losses and they can. Every pilot we lose is irreplaceable. Every pilot they lose is replaced in 18 months by 2 more pilots. Then why fight? Morinaga asked. If the mathematics guarantee defeat, why commit forces to a battle that serves no strategic purpose except institutional pride? Karita had no answer, or rather, he had an answer he could not speak aloud, because the institution had chosen path 1, fight to the last man, not through rational strategic calculation, but through inability to choose anything else without repudiating itself. The Imperial Navy's entire identity rested on offensive spirit, decisive battle doctrine, and faith that superior training and courage overcome material disadvantage. Abandoning that identity, even to save lives, would destroy what made the Navy the Navy. The conference concluded with operational assignments. Karita would command Center Force, a surface action group built around the battleships Yamato and Musashi, plus heavy cruisers and destroyers. His mission: engage American invasion forces, disrupt landings, inflict maximum casualties on American fleet units. Exactly the kind of offensive action Navy doctrine demanded. Exactly the kind of operation that would send his crews into battles where American production had already determined the outcome. He returned to his flagship and found a message waiting from Combined Fleet Intelligence. New production estimates based on captured documents and reconnaissance photography. American aircraft production for 1944 projected at 96,000 units. Japanese production projected at 28,000 units. American merchant shipping construction estimated at 5,591 vessels by war's end. Japanese merchant shipping losses in 1943 alone exceeded 1,000 vessels, with production replacing only 769. The message included a bureaucratic notation: for information only, no action required. Translation: we know we cannot do anything about it. File it away and do not discuss. Karita filed the message with his Liberty ship documentation. The folder had grown thick with evidence: photographs, cargo manifests, production reports, intelligence summaries, a comprehensive catalogue of Japan's mathematical impossibility of victory. He had started the file thinking it might inform strategic decisions. Now he understood its true purpose: documentation for historians. Proof that the truth had been available. Proof that officers had known. Proof that the catastrophe unfolding across the Pacific had been chosen through institutional inertia rather than stumbled into through ignorance. He thought of the woman next to Crane 7 earning $1.80 per hour, working overtime voluntarily to build warships. She probably had no idea that her productivity, multiplied across thousands of Kaiser shipyard workers, multiplied across hundreds of American factories and shipyards, represented a force more decisive than any battle fleet. She probably thought she was just doing her job. But her job was ending empires. October 1944. The Americans invaded Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. Karita commanded Center Force, 5 battleships including Yamato and Musashi, 10 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, 15 destroyers in what would become the largest naval battle in history. The operation aimed to destroy American invasion transports and create conditions for negotiated settlement. One last decisive battle. One final chance to prove fighting spirit could overcome production ratios. American carrier aircraft found Center Force in the Sibuyan Sea on October 24th. Wave after wave, dozens of aircraft per strike, hundreds total throughout the day. Musashi absorbed 20 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits before capsizing, taking 1,000 casualties with her. 3 cruisers sunk, 2 damaged. The American pilots attacked with methodical precision, rotating strikes every 90 minutes. Their coordination enabled by radio networks that let them mass attacks from multiple carriers simultaneously. By nightfall, Karita's force had been reduced by 30% without ever engaging the main American fleet. His staff calculated American aircraft losses at 43 confirmed destroyed. But new strikes kept coming, the aircraft seemingly infinite, each wave fresh and well coordinated as the first. Where were they all coming from? Karita knew the answer: from Essex-class carriers commissioned every 3 months, from escort carriers built in 6 weeks on merchant hulls, from factory production lines that had reconceived naval aviation as manufacturing. Center Force pushed through San Bernardino Strait during the night and emerged into Leyte Gulf at dawn on October 25th. And there, incredibly, Karita found American escort carriers, lightly armed, slow, vulnerable. Carriers with perhaps 180 aircraft total, supported by 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. No heavy units, no battleships. The invasion transports lay beyond, undefended. 1 hour of surface action would annihilate them. The mission would succeed. Fighting spirit validated. For 30 minutes, Karita's force engaged, sinking 1 escort carrier and damaging others. His battleship's 18-inch guns found range. Victory seemed possible. Then Karita ordered general withdrawal. His staff was stunned. The enemy was before them. Victory within reach. Why retreat? Because Karita had seen the Liberty ship, because he understood what 1 hour of tactical success meant against an opponent who built ships faster than Japan could sink them. Because he knew that even if he destroyed every American vessel in Leyte Gulf, more would arrive next week and the week after and the month after. The industrial behemoth did not stop. It did not tire. It simply produced, shipped, replaced, faster than any military could destroy. Tactical victory would change nothing when strategic defeat was mathematically certain.